There's a rhythm to life that can lull a man to sleep, a steady beat of the same song played day after day. It's the hum of the alarm at dawn, the drone of the highway, the clang of the clock striking 5. And sometimes, caught in that rhythm, a man can forget the melody he once wanted to sing, trading it instead for the quiet, insistent drum of just getting by. He looks around and sees the years stacking up like inventory, each one identical to the last, and wonders when the music stopped, or if it ever really began. It's a feeling many know, that slow, creeping realization that the current isn't taking you anywhere new, just further down the same worn path. Garrett was a man who knew that rhythm well. 42 years old, and a decade and a half of those years had been spent inside the cavernous, echoing shell of the Apex distribution warehouse. You could read his story in his hands if you cared to look. Knuckles a little swollen, skin permanently ingrained with the fine dust of cardboard and the ghost of forgotten labels. They were workers' hands, no doubt about it, capable of lifting, sorting, pushing, pulling, the kind of hands that built things and maintained things, but also the kind that carried the quiet weariness of routine. He moved through the aisles with a practiced efficiency, his steel-toed boots scuffing a familiar path across the concrete floor. His frame was solid, not heavy, but built like a man who had wrestled with gravity for a living. Most days, he wore a faded blue t-shirt under a work vest, the kind that spoke more of utility than fashion, and a ball cap pulled low, shadowing eyes that missed nothing. They were observant eyes, those of a man who watched more than he spoke, taking in the small dramas of the warehouse floor, the new guy fumbling with a pallet jack, the supervisor on his third coffee break, the subtle shift in the light when the clouds finally gave way. He wasn't one for small talk, Garrett. You'd get a nod, maybe a gruff morning if you caught him right, but mostly he kept to himself. Some folks thought he was reserved, others just quiet. The truth was, he didn't see much point in filling the silence with empty words. Actions, he believed, spoke louder, and his actions spoke of an unwavering dependability. He was the guy who showed up on time every time, rain or shine, even when the flu was knocking him sideways. He did his job, and he did it right without fuss or complaint. A quiet integrity hummed beneath his skin, a bedrock truth that made him fundamentally honest. There was no flash in Garrett, no grand gestures. Just the steady, unyielding presence of a man who earned his keep, one hard day at a time, carrying the weight of his own world, and a flicker of something unexpressed, almost hopeful, deep within his watchful gaze. But that quiet integrity, that rock-solid dependability, it was built on something heavy. It was built on the unyielding rhythm of a life that felt more like a conveyor belt than a path of his own choosing. His world began before the sun thought about rising, the blare of his 5 a.m. alarm a daily jolt that ripped him from shallow sleep. Sarah, his wife, would stir beside him, maybe a soft groan, but she knew the drill. 2 minutes later, his feet were on the cold floor, the house still breathing sleepily around him. He'd make coffee, black and strong, the only luxury he truly indulged in before heading out. The commute was short, the drive usually silent, his mind already ticking through the day's tasks. In the vast, echoing expanse of the warehouse, the hours blurred. Forklifts hummed, boxes stacked, pallets moved, push, pull, lift, scan. It was a dance of brute force and monotonous precision, his body knowing the movements almost better than his mind. He was good at it, efficient, strong. But every box he moved, every order he filled, felt like another brick in a wall he couldn't climb over. The money, it was decent enough to keep the lights on, mostly. But it was also just enough to keep him perpetually treading water. His modest suburban home, the one he and Sarah had scraped together a down payment for over a decade ago, whispered its needs in quiet corners. A leaky faucet here, a peeling paint spot there, a worn-out section of the roof that worried him every time a storm rolled in. Emily, his 12-year-old, needed new shoes, and Josh, 9, outgrew his clothes faster than the paychecks came in. There was always a bill, always an unexpected expense that swallowed up any thought of saving, any glimmer of breathing room. The grocery runs felt like a calculated exercise in deprivation, always mentally subtracting, always putting back that one treat the kids might have liked. Underneath Garrett's quiet exterior, a deep, persistent frustration churned. He watched the world move around him, faster, richer, seemingly easier for everyone else. He was a good man, a hard worker, honest to his core. But what did it get him? A permanent spot on the hamster wheel. He harbored dreams, unspoken for years, buried under the daily grind like old blueprints in a forgotten drawer. A small business idea he'd toyed with in his younger days, a skill he always meant to learn, a vague notion of more for Sarah and the kids, a future where they didn't have to worry about every single dime. The gap between the man he was, reliable, hardworking, stuck, and the man he wanted to be, provider, builder, free, felt like a canyon. He'd think about it, usually late at night, after everyone else was asleep, the house silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. He'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, sketching out plans in his head, mentally crunching numbers, imagining a different path. But then morning would come, the alarm would blare, and the weight of the day, the sheer momentum of his routine would pull him back in. Not good enough, he'd tell himself, dismissing a budding idea before it even had a chance to sprout. Too much work. Where would I even find the time? The self-doubt was a relentless current, dragging him back from the shore of action, leaving him stranded in the familiar quicksand of inaction. He was stuck, a prisoner of his own making, his quiet strength paradoxically contributing to his stagnation. He showed up, did the work, didn't complain, and in doing so never really pushed against the bars of his own cage. He had ideas, good ones sometimes, but they remained just that, ideas, floating in the ether of what-ifs, never tethered to the ground by a single, concrete step. And that, more than any bill or broken pipe, was what truly haunted Garrett. That feeling that he was slowly, silently, letting his own life slip through his calloused fingers. Garrett's days began before the sun even considered making an appearance. 5 a.m. The digital numbers on the cheap alarm clock pulsed a harsh red against the pre-dawn gloom. He'd slap it quiet before it could fully rouse Sarah, then swing his legs over the side of the bed, the familiar ache in his lower back already a greeting. A quick, lukewarm shower, the water pressure just good enough to get the job done, never quite invigorating. Coffee, black, strong and fast, usually drunk standing at the kitchen counter, listening to the muffled sounds of the house still asleep. The drive to the warehouse was a familiar blur of streetlights and the faint smell of exhaust. 20 minutes, same route every day, the radio a low hum of morning news he barely registered. The warehouse itself was a beast of steel and concrete, a cavernous space filled with the rumble of forklifts, the clang of metal and the constant, low roar of machinery. His job? Stacking, lifting, checking manifests, moving boxes that felt heavier with each passing year. Hour after hour, repetition bred a kind of numb efficiency. He knew exactly how many boxes of widgets could fit on a pallet, how to maneuver a hand truck through a tight aisle with his eyes half closed. His hands, perpetually roughened and scarred, were a testament to years of this quiet, physical labor. Each dent, each scuff, a small medal for showing up. Lunch was a thermos of soup or a sandwich Sarah packed, eaten alone in a corner, watching the younger guys joke and play cards. Garrett didn't join in much. He'd listen, observe, maybe offer a quiet nod if someone looked his way. His mind, even during these brief respites, often drifted. Not to grand adventures, but to the grocery list Sarah had left on the fridge, or the sputtering sound the old furnace had made last night, or the new tires the minivan desperately needed before winter set in. Always bills. Always something that needed fixing, something that needed buying, something that chipped away at the thin layer of financial security he worked so hard to maintain. When he finally pulled back into his driveway, usually around 5:30 or 6, the house looked the same, modest, slightly worn, its paint peeling in a few spots. The porch light, still on from the night before, seemed to sigh with him. Inside, it was a different world. The boisterous energy of Emily and Josh, the comforting smell of Sarah's cooking. For those precious hours, he could almost forget the relentless grind. He'd help with homework, tell a tired joke, or simply sit at the dinner table, absorbing the warmth of his family. But even then, at the periphery of his awareness, a dull throb persisted. He'd look at Emily, 12 going on 30, already dreaming big, drawing intricate plans for treehouses or fortresses. Then he'd look at Josh, 9, a whirlwind of boundless energy, oblivious to the quiet worries that lined his father's face. And then Sarah. Sarah, who always found a way to make ends meet, who never complained, but whose own tired eyes sometimes mirrored his. He wanted more for them. So much more. He promised himself he'd find a way, one day, to give them the life they deserved. A life free from the endless tightrope walk of paycheck to paycheck. But the promise remained unspoken, a quiet whisper in his own head, usually drowned out by the sheer exhaustion. By the time the kids were in bed and he and Sarah had watched an hour of TV they barely registered, his own eyelids were heavy. He'd fall into bed, planning to wake up early tomorrow and finally tackle that online course he'd bookmarked, or research that side hustle idea he'd had, or just sit down and map out a real budget. But morning would come, the alarm would blare, and the cycle would begin again, pulling him under like a relentless undertow. The unspoken ambition, that deep-seated longing for something beyond the warehouse walls, it wasn't dead. It was just buried under layers of obligation, under the weight of responsibility, under the pervasive belief that this was simply his lot. He'd dismiss his own flashes of insight, his own nascent ideas with a practiced ease. Who am I to start a business? That's for people with college degrees or capital or time. Time was the biggest lie he told himself. He didn't have time. Not for anything that wasn't immediately necessary. But the truth was, he often had pockets of it, small slivers that he filled with scrolling through his phone, or staring blankly at the TV, or just sitting in silence, too weary to engage. Those were the moments when the self-doubt whispered its loudest, when the feeling of being stuck became almost unbearable. He was a good man, a hardworking man, but he was also a man who had forgotten how to dream with his eyes open, a man who had surrendered to the current instead of trying to paddle. And the slow, silent drift was taking him further and further from the shore he longed to reach. The unspoken ambition, that deep-seated longing for something beyond the warehouse walls, it wasn't dead. It was just buried. Buried under layers of obligation, under the weight of responsibility, under the pervasive belief that this was simply his lot. He'd dismiss his own flashes of insight, his own nascent ideas with a practiced ease. Who am I to start a business? That's for people with college degrees or capital or time. Time was the biggest lie he told himself. He didn't have time, not for anything that wasn't immediately necessary. But the truth was, he often had pockets of it, small slivers that he filled with scrolling through his phone, or staring blankly at the TV, or just sitting in silence, too weary to engage. Those were the moments when the self-doubt whispered its loudest, when the feeling of being stuck became almost unbearable. He was a good man, a hardworking man, but he was also a man who had forgotten how to dream with his eyes open, a man who had surrendered to the current instead of trying to paddle. And the slow, silent drift was taking him further and further from the shore he longed to reach. Then came the crack, not a sudden, violent break, but a hairline fracture that started small, then spiderwebbed through the solid facade he'd built around his life. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the last hour of his shift felt like a week, pushing pallets until his shoulders screamed. The drone of the forklifts and the smell of cardboard were embedded in his clothes, his hair. He walked through his front door, the familiar hum of the house offering little comfort against the deep ache in his bones. Emily and Josh were at the kitchen table, animatedly recounting some schoolyard drama. Sarah met him with a tired smile, a small stack of mail in her hand. "Another one, Garrett," she said, her voice a little too flat, holding up a stark white envelope. It was from the furnace company, a final notice demanding payment for a repair they thought had been settled months ago. The unexpected bill landed in his palm like a stone. Just another hole in an already tattered budget, another unexpected dip in the already shallow pool of their savings. His stomach tightened, a familiar knot of dread twisting inside him. He slumped onto the couch, the red "Final Notice" blazing from the paper, his mind already spinning through the usual agonizing calculations. Where could they cut? What could they do without this month? The kids needed new shoes. Emily's school trip was coming up. From the dining room table, he heard Emily's focused hum. She was bent over a large piece of butcher paper, colored pencils scattered around her like fallen autumn leaves. He watched her, half listening to Josh describe some new video game character, half absorbed in the rising panic the bill had sparked. Emily, however, was utterly oblivious to his turmoil, absorbed in her own world. She wasn't just drawing a picture of a treehouse. She was meticulously sketching out a detailed, step-by-step plan. He leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the intensity of her focus. There were little numbered boxes, arrows, labels written in her neat, childish script. "First, gather 2 long planks for the base," she mumbled to herself, tracing a line with a green pencil. "Then use sturdy ropes to attach to the oak tree, making sure it's level. Step 3, nail the floorboards." Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her small hand moving with a deliberate, confident stroke. She'd even drawn a miniature calendar at the top of the page with Day 1, research materials, and Day 2, ask Dad for help with drawings, already checked off. It was a complete blueprint, broken down into manageable daily tasks. He sat there, the furnace bill forgotten in his numb hand, watching his 12-year-old daughter outline her dream with such quiet purpose. Saw the sheer, unyielding logic of her approach. She didn't just want a treehouse. She was planning it, one small, intentional step at a time. And in that moment, the scattered, chaotic thoughts in his own head, the endless "I shoulds" and "I'll get around to it's," suddenly coalesced into a stark, uncomfortable truth. His daughter, with her crayons and childish ambition, had a clearer, more effective strategy for achieving her goal than he, a 42-year-old man, had for his entire financial future. He had been waiting for a miracle or a big break or a mythical block of free time that never came, while Emily was just doing a little bit every day. The realization hit him like a physical blow, cold and clear. His own life was a series of reactions, hers a series of deliberate actions. The crack had widened. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The house eventually quieted, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. Garrett lay beside Sarah, listening to her soft, even breathing, but his own mind was a restless storm. He watched the digital clock on the nightstand flip from 2:47 to 2:48, then 2:49. The red numbers seemed to mock him, each tick a reminder of the precious time slipping through his fingers. Carefully, he slipped out of bed, the floorboards groaning a protest under his weight, and padded into the living room. He sat in the worn armchair, the one with the slight dip where he always sat, and just stared into the gloom. The furnace bill lay accusingly on the coffee table, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. But it wasn't just the bill. It was Emily's treehouse drawing, still out on the dining table, visible in the sliver of moonlight from the window. It was her innocent, yet profoundly effective methodology. He saw himself, stretched out across the years, a man always about to do something, always thinking about change, but rarely doing it. The words of his inner demons, the ones that had always whispered, not good enough. Too much work. What's the point? They echoed, but now they sounded hollow, pathetic. He'd been letting them win. He'd been letting them justify his inaction, his endless procrastination. The raw truth, stripped bare of all the excuses he'd built around himself, felt like a punch to the gut. He wasn't stuck because of circumstances. He was stuck because of habit. His habit of dismissing his own potential, of letting the daily grind consume every ounce of his energy, leaving nothing for the deliberate cultivation of his future. He saw the modest, slightly worn home, every creak and loose floorboard a testament to the things they couldn't quite afford to fix, the things he didn't quite make the time for. He saw Sarah's tired smile, a reflection of her own quiet endurance. He saw Emily and Josh, their bright, hopeful faces, and he felt a searing shame that tightened his chest. He was their provider, their protector, and yet he was treading water, barely keeping their heads above the rising tide of bills and obligations. He was failing them not out of malice but out of inertia. He had the strength, the resilience to show up every day at the warehouse, but he lacked the courage to consistently fight for a better tomorrow, not just endure today. This wasn't about wanting more, it was about doing what was necessary. And he hadn't been, not truly. He hadn't been taking the small, deliberate steps. He was just waiting for the bucket to fill itself. And it never would. He wasn't waiting for the bucket to fill itself. He wasn't even trying to scoop water into it with his bare hands anymore. He was just letting it sit there empty, while the rain of life fell all around him, never quite reaching inside. The silence of the house pressed in, broken only by the soft hum of the old refrigerator and his own ragged breathing. He opened his eyes, staring at the darkened ceiling. The faces of his children, Emily and Josh, floated in the gloom, followed by Sarah's. Their trust, their unspoken faith in him, felt like a heavy cloak. He felt the weight of it not as a burden but as a moral imperative. He had to be better. He could be better. It wasn't about some grand, sweeping gesture. It was about the little, everyday things, Emily's treehouse plan, tiny, deliberate steps taken consistently. He didn't know how yet. He didn't have a map. He didn't even have a compass. All he knew was that the path he'd been on, the one paved with good intentions and endless procrastination, was a dead end. He couldn't keep waking up every day, doing the same thing, expecting a different result. That, he realized, was the very definition of insanity. It wasn't a furious, dramatic outburst, not a fist pounded on the mattress. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift deep within his gut, a quiet, steel-edged whisper that echoed the truth his daughter had unwittingly shown him. Enough! He breathed into the darkness. Just that one word. Enough. Enough with the wishing, enough with the waiting, enough with the endless cycle of exhaustion and self-doubt. Enough with letting his life just happen to him. From now on, he decided, he would happen to his life. The next morning, the alarm blared at 5 a.m. as usual. His body ached, the memory of yesterday's pallet still fresh in his muscles. The familiar autopilot sensation tried to kick in, urging him to grab a quick coffee, maybe mindlessly scroll his phone for a few minutes before the daily ritual of getting ready for the grind. But as he swung his feet to the cold floor, the whisper from the night before resonated, stronger this time. Enough. He walked past the kitchen, past the coffee maker. His mind, still foggy with sleep, felt like a battlefield. The old habits, deep-grooved pathways of least resistance called to him. Just 5 more minutes, Garrett. What difference will it make? You're tired. It's too early for this. But then Emily's focused face, bent over her treehouse drawings, flashed in his mind. The methodical, unglamorous, consistent work. He detoured to the small, dusty corner of the living room where he kept an ancient, slow-running laptop. It was rarely used for anything beyond bills or the occasional school project. He powered it on. The screen flickered to life sluggishly. He didn't have a specific plan, no grand strategy for wealth creation immediately sprung to mind. He just remembered the core idea: daily, intentional action. Just 30 minutes. That was the new deal with himself. 30 minutes, no matter what, dedicated to one specific financial or personal growth task. He sat down, feeling clumsy and awkward in the quiet morning. What to do first? He typed, "How to create a budget spreadsheet." Into the search bar, the results popped up, an overwhelming jumble of articles and templates. He picked one, a simple tutorial. For the next half hour, he watched the small cursor move across the screen, mimicking the steps, trying to understand rows and columns, formulas he'd never cared about. It felt utterly insignificant. He misspelled words, clicked the wrong buttons, felt a hot flush of frustration bloom in his chest. His brain, accustomed to the physical demands of the warehouse, felt slow and resistant to this new kind of work. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was a waste of time, that he should be getting ready for work, that this was never going to amount to anything. The self-doubt, his oldest companion, whispered its poison. But he kept going. He paused the video, replayed sections. He stumbled through the creation of a basic spreadsheet, listing his income and his fixed expenses. It was clunky, probably wrong in a dozen places, and certainly nowhere near a professional financial plan. But when the timer he'd set on his phone chimed, signaling the end of his 30 minutes, Garrett didn't feel the usual exhaustion. He felt a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was just the quiet satisfaction of having started, and having done it even when he didn't want to, even when it felt stupid and pointless. He had shown up for himself just like he showed up at the warehouse every day. He had taken the first deliberate drop and added it to the bucket. The next morning, the spark felt a whole lot smaller. The 4:30 a.m. alarm was a colder, harsher sound. Garrett's body screamed for more sleep, and his mind was already serving up a dozen reasons why another 30 minutes of staring at a screen trying to make sense of numbers was a fool's errand. Just once won't hurt, the old whisper started. You're tired. You need your rest for the real work. He dragged himself out of bed, the floorboards groaning under his weight, each step an argument against itself. He sat down at the small dining table, the laptop a cold, silent judge. He opened the spreadsheet from yesterday, a jumble of figures that still made little sense. Today, he decided he'd figure out his credit card interest rates. It seemed simple enough. But the words on the bank's website, all that fine print, blurred into an unintelligible mess. Frustration knotted in his stomach. He pictured himself back in the warehouse, lifting heavy boxes, the familiar ache in his shoulders a comfort compared to this mental fog. He knew how to work with his hands. This felt like trying to write with his feet. He wanted to slam the laptop shut, wanted to walk away and forget this whole stupid idea. But then he thought of Emily, her methodical little hands sketching that treehouse plan day after day. He heard her voice, "Daddy, I just need to draw this one branch today." And he stayed. He reread the terms, highlighted keywords, looked up definitions he didn't understand. By the time his timer chimed, he hadn't fully grasped it all, but he knew more than he did an hour ago. Just a bit more. Another drop. By day 7, the initial, almost accidental satisfaction had completely evaporated. It was just a new, irritating chore on top of all the old ones. The grind of the warehouse seemed to seep into his mornings, making the laptop feel heavier than any box. One morning, Josh had woken up early, complaining of a sore throat. Sarah, half asleep, had asked Garrett to check on him. He'd gone, of course, pushing his 30 minutes back. By the time he was done comforting Josh and getting him settled, the precious window was almost gone. His mind immediately leaped to a dozen excuses. Today's just not going to happen. It's okay to miss one. You have good reason. But as he looked at Josh's small, flushed face, a different thought settled. What if this was the reason to do it? To make sure he could cover those unexpected doctor's bills without a knot in his gut. He sat back down at the table, the light just beginning to break through the kitchen window. He had 15 minutes left. He decided to just organize the various passwords he'd scribbled on random scraps of paper over the years into a single, secure document. It was a small task, a housekeeping item, but it was something. He hated it every second of it, but he did it. Then came day 14, a long, particularly brutal shift at the warehouse, a snag in the supply chain that meant late hours, heavy lifting, and a foreman breathing down everyone's neck. Garrett stumbled through the front door close to midnight, his muscles aching, his mind a dull throb. He collapsed onto the couch, too tired even to eat, and fell into a restless sleep, waking with a jolt at 3 a.m. The alarm for his usual start was only an hour and a half away. There's no way, he told himself, the thought a heavy stone in his chest. You need to sleep. You'll be useless at work otherwise. He stared at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of defeat settle over him. He'd missed it. He was a failure, just like all those other times he'd tried to start something new. He drifted back to sleep, the bitter taste of giving up already in his mouth. He woke again at 4:30 a.m., the alarm a silent scream. His body protested, but something else, a stubborn, quiet defiance, began to stir. He hadn't done his 30 minutes yesterday, and for the first time in a long time that bothered him. It wasn't just about the 30 minutes, it was about the promise he'd made to himself. He stood up slowly, feeling every creak and groan in his frame. He wasn't going to work harder today, he wasn't going to make up for lost time. He was just going to do his 30 minutes. He sat at the table, opened his budget spreadsheet, and started researching ways to cut down on his grocery bill, clipping coupons, planning meals. It was tedious. It felt like pulling teeth, and halfway through his eyes kept trying to close, but he kept them open. He pushed through the exhaustion, through the shame of having missed a day, through the persistent whisper that this was all pointless. He was still showing up, not with a bang, but with a quiet, stubborn refusal to let the bucket run dry. He had taken another drop, and that, he realized, was the battle, not the big wins, but the small, deliberate acts of showing up when every fiber of his being told him to quit. Days bled into weeks. Some mornings were still a brutal fight against the blankets, against the sheer, crushing weight of habit. There were days he'd stare at the screen, brain feeling like gravel, wondering what the point was, but something had shifted. The internal monologue, that gruff, defeatist voice, had lost some of its bite. It was still there, sure, a low hum of doubt, but it was no longer the only voice. Now another voice, smaller but steadier, started to whisper, "Just 30 minutes, just show up." And he did. He found a free online course on basic computer programming. He researched low-cost investment accounts. He spent a Saturday morning planning out his meals for the week, not just to save money, but to free up mental space during his precious evenings. He stumbled upon an old, broken lawnmower on the curb, dragged it home, and spent a week of his deliberate 30s researching how to fix small engines just for the hell of it. He eventually got it running, loud and proud, and sold it for $50. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was money he'd created, not just earned from punching a clock. A small but undeniable ripple in his stagnant financial pond. Sarah noticed first. "You're less growly in the mornings," she commented one Saturday, pouring him a second cup of coffee. He just grunted, but a small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. His coworkers saw it too, less complaining about the new safety protocols, more quiet focus. He even started offering solutions to minor logistical snags at the warehouse, ideas he'd always had but never bothered to voice, dismissing them as not his place. The biggest shift, though, was internal. The pervasive sense of dread that used to cling to him like dust, that heavy expectation of the next bill, the next breakdown, slowly began to lift. It wasn't gone entirely. Life had a way of always throwing curveballs. But now he felt a quiet confidence, a sense of having a playbook, even if it was just a small, handwritten one. He wasn't just reacting to life anymore. He was proactively building, brick by small brick, something new. Hope had returned not as a flimsy wish, but as a solid, tangible byproduct of consistent action. Months turned into a year. The garage, once a graveyard of half-finished projects and forgotten tools, had become his workshop. The old lawnmower was just the first. He'd fixed up a half-dozen more, a couple of bicycles, even a small generator, selling them online and banking the profit. He'd completed that programming course, enough to build simple websites, and had even started doing freelance work for local small businesses in the evenings. The first paycheck from that, separate from his warehouse wage, felt like pure magic. The daily deliberate 30 had grown organically. Sometimes it was an hour, sometimes 45 minutes, but it was always something. He wasn't just budgeting anymore. He was investing in low-cost index funds. He wasn't just dreaming of house repairs. He was watching YouTube videos on DIY plumbing and replacing leaky faucets himself, saving hundreds. That modest, slightly worn suburban home slowly started to shed its weariness, one small repair at a time, each one a testament to Garrett's new habit. Emily's treehouse, inspired by her methodical planning, wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a physical structure slowly taking shape in the backyard, a joint project where Garrett applied his newfound planning skills. He still worked at the warehouse. The work was still hard, but now it felt different. It was a means to an end, a solid foundation, not a cage. He saw his future not as an endless conveyor belt, but as a path he was actively paving, one small, deliberate step at a time. "You know," Garrett said to Sarah one evening, sitting on their newly repaired porch swing, the air cool and sweet. "For years I just kept my head down, working, hoping things would get better. But hope ain't a strategy. It wasn't about working harder, it was about working smarter every single day. Just a little bit. That's it." He gestured vaguely at the backyard where Emily and Josh were playing, their laughter ringing clear. "That small daily push, that's what added up. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a leaky faucet. If you just wait, nothing happens. But if you keep adding drops, eventually it overflows. That's what changed everything for me." And indeed it had. The man who once carried the quiet weariness of routine now carried a different kind of quiet. A quiet resolve, a quiet strength, the steady hum of a life being deliberately built. He wasn't a different man. He was just Garrett,